Hey, what's going on, man? I got myself a problem. Now, it's a first world problem, but it's still a problem that I think that a lot of us share. It's a topic that isn't often talked about, but I think we've all kind of raised an eyebrow at least once or twice, and that is, what the heck is going on with these game publishers and classifying an HD port, a remaster, a remake, and a reboot or reimagining? It seems like there's no consistency across the board as to what those different topics mean. They kind of blend together in a way that it's frustrating as a consumer, because honestly, you just want to be able to hear that there's going to be a remaster for a Nintendo game and know what that means before you even see a screenshot. But that's not the world we live in right now. And so for this topic, I kind of want to go over that muddied mess and also maybe propose an idea, a guideline for both consumers and publishers as to what each of these topics mean. I think we need a big major publisher like Nintendo or Sony to come forward and make these defined rules for us. But until then, I'm just going to make a YouTube video about it. Okay, let's start applying some definitions to these terms. Now, you might not agree with everything that I'm saying here, and that's totally fine. That's the reason why this topic even exists in the first place. There's so much confusion about what each of these things actually mean. So to start with, what I think the term HD port means is simply that. It's just a port of a game that was once in 480p or maybe even 720p, and it's been up-res to something like 1080p. And sure, you could touch up a couple of the HUD elements on Super Mario 64 and then classify that as a remaster, just in the same way that if I was to play a couple of bars on this harmonica here, I can call this my new album instead of a YouTube video, but that's a little disingenuous. Just a little bit. Though jokes aside, I found that Nintendo is actually the most agreeable to how I kind of classify these things. For example, Skyward Sword HD is just called that, Skyward Sword HD. It's not a remaster, they don't advertise it as a remaster, while on the other hand they have Metroid Prime Remastered, and that thing has all new visuals across the board. New visual effects, new models, the whole works, but it plays the same, and so I think they nailed it. Sony, on the other hand, seemed to be really ashamed of the term HD port. I don't think in any of the collections that they ever put out, which are fantastic by the way, they ever use the term HD port. They usually say something like remastered in high definition. I don't understand. Just call it an HD port. And funny enough, to add to the confusion of this whole topic, I found a couple of games that use the term HD instead of remaster when they're remasters. Like, for example, Twilight Princess HD. That game has all new textures across the board. They were redone, but they call it Twilight Princess HD, which, let's talk about remasters. So again, in my definition, it doesn't matter how many quality of life improvements you add to this game. It matters what you do visually with it. So if you're doing things to the textures all across the board, or if you change the models to look more modern, that to me is a remaster. So long as the source code is still being used in the game in some capacity, then you have a remaster on your hands. Believe it or not, there is the Insane trilogy, and it oftentimes gets advertised as a remaster, but I did some research and I found out that the Insane trilogy does not use any of the original source code, so that means that game was made from the ground up to be a lot like these old Crash Bandicoot games, meaning that is a remake, but they didn't call it that. And again, we'll get there. Remake is the most frustrating thing in this whole video, I am telling you right now. But anyway, still on the topic of remasters, Shadow of the Colossus on PlayStation 4 is another fantastic example of a game that is just a great remaster. That game was advertised as being made from the ground up, and that's just not true. I just want you to look at this Digital Foundry video where they interview the developers, and they say themselves that the original coding for the game is running simultaneously with the graphics engine.
We really tailored our technology to be able to extract certain pieces, put certain pieces of the game through our own technology, but then also run the original game engine side by side.
AKA, the game is using all of its source code. AKA, it's a remaster, which means that the same game managed to have an HD port parading as a remaster and a remaster parading as a remake. That's one game with so much marketing confusion. And then you would think that this is some sort of marketing tactic to push sales. Meanwhile, over on Capcom's side of things, WayForward produced a DuckTales game with the original voice cast, all new level designs, crisp frame-by-frame animation, new bosses, and new levels. All, of course, without even so much of a hint of the original source code. And for some reason, despite the fact that there's so much wholly unique to this game and remade all the way from the ground up, the title of this game is called DuckTales Remastered. But maybe the rules for a remake is just not quite clear enough. So let's talk about it. All right, now for your consideration, this is what I think a remake should be. This is probably the most contentious part of what I feel like defines what a remake is, because at the end of the day, I feel like we all need something that removes some confusion to the consumers when it comes to these terms, right? But with remakes, I feel like there should be a little bit of leeway to it. If something like the Insane Trilogy is made all the way from the ground up, there's no source code there, there isn't like some corners that are being cut. Everything that you see in the Insane Trilogy is made from scratch. That means it should be considered a remake. And as a consumer, it's still pretty important to know that something that tries to aim to be that identical to the original source material is still a remake, because you learn certain things by knowing that. People have made a point to say that the way that Crash moves in the Insane Trilogy is slightly different from the source material. And so hardcore fans make a whole point about how, oh no, I can't jump in the way that I usually do. This is kind of crazy. It's kind of insane. They're not saying that. But the point is that they get a little bit upset because it's slightly different. But you know what? If they had known that it was a remake in the first place, I think a lot of people would be a lot more open to what's going on here. There's a lot more work involved. But back to my point about how, okay, so something that's striving to be almost identical to the original games can be considered a remake. What about something like Resident Evil 2 Remake, where the gameplay is drastically altered, right? So in the original game, you had these characters that had like these tank controls and the cameras had these locked perspectives and everything. But in Resident Evil 2 Remake, it kind of borrows a page from Resident Evil 4's book, and it has the over-the-shoulder camera. Now, the thing is, though, that it doesn't play identical to Resident Evil 4. It invokes a lot of the spirit of the survival aspect of Resident Evil 2. The tone, the story beats, it's all there. It's trying so hard to basically be a modernized version of Resident Evil 2, but not just be Resident Evil 2 with some updated visuals and quality of life improvements. That to me is also a remake. It's not quite a reboot in my mind, because a reboot is something like Bionic Commando Rearmed, guys. Bionic Commando Rearmed is so... Oops, I just made a silly Billy. I'm holding in my hand in the shot here Bionic Commando, simply titled Bionic Commando. But in two instances, I say Bionic Commando Rearmed, which is actually a remake of Bionic Commando, and it's pretty flippin' fantastic. What I'm holding in my hand in this shot, though, is absolutely the opposite of flippin' fantastic. It's so divorced from what Bionic Commando used to be. You know, it's trying to retell a story, and it's only vaguely using elements from the original game in order to tell an all-new narrative. This, to me, is so much different from Resident Evil 2 and what it's trying to do. I wouldn't want to lump Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 3, well, maybe Resident Evil 3 kind of goes off the beat a bit. But Resident Evil 4 Remake, I wouldn't want to lump those guys in with this. You know what I mean? I don't know. But here is the funniest thing of all. Nobody in the industry wants to use the term remake when they release a remake. One of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. You would think that the word remake is highly marketable. When I hear the word remake, I know exactly what that means. If you said to me that, hey, by the way, you own a GameCube, right? Did you know that there's a remake of one of the most profound PS1 games of all time called Metal Gear Solid? I would have been like, dude, hook me up to the Shago Hut or whatever. Why did I pick Shago? Dude, sign me up. I want to play as Solid Snake. I want to experience that story. And of course I want to do it all with updated visuals. But I had no idea that that game even existed for years. Because guess what? It's not called Metal Gear Solid Remake. It's called Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. And I also didn't know that I was getting a remake of Metroid 1 when I bought it. I just was a Metroid fan, and I saw ads for the game, and I thought, oh yeah, you know, a Metroid game, I'll pick that up. Metroid Zero Mission. I had no idea. I had no idea that was a remake until I started playing it. Now look, those name titles are really cool. Zero Mission, Twin Snakes. It's really edgy, but it's not helping me understand what I'm buying here. And again, I don't know why nobody will call their game remake. except for one company, Square Enix, and it's not even a remake. It disguises itself as a remake, but make no mistake, it's a stealth sequel. You're not getting the full story of Final Fantasy VII by playing Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's a red herring. It's a coy. It's a troll on the player. You're meant to think it's a remake, and then it just goes off on a tangent of its own story that requires you to play the original game to fully understand, or at least look at a Wikipedia article. So, my brain just exploded. That's what that was. I'm sorry that I was just kind of like, if anybody's in a position of power, a game publisher, whatever, if you see this video, please, for the love of God, if you make a remake, call it your video game title and then remake, and you will make so much more money. I promise you, because we all love remakes. Okay, some people don't like remakes for some reason. I don't relate to those people, but I and many other people love remakes, and it would just be nice to know that we're buying a remake. Don't do brand confusion, please. It's hurt my soul. It made me take time away from Boundary Break just to make this video. So, yeah. Okay, well, I hope this helps.